name is Michelle McCutcheon-Shore, and I want to welcome you to our webinar, Going Electric, Lessons in Planning for Electric School Buses, hosted by us here at the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. First, I just want to mention a few little admin things. We are going to have the participants muted for the whole workshop. If you have questions or if you're having trouble hearing us, please just place a question in the question box. We have someone monitoring that, and she will let us know if anyone's having trouble hearing us. We're also going to hold all questions to the end of the webinar. So if you have questions during our presentation, please feel free to put that in the question box. And again, we'll have someone monitoring that, and we'll address the questions at the end. So with that, I'll dive right in. So we have three presenters here today. Myself, I'll be talking about electric school bus fundamentals. Jennifer Wallace-Berger, who's the director of the Transportation Efficiency Team here at VEIC, will talk about funding. And Bethany Whitaker, one of our senior consultants, who's also the project manager for the Massachusetts Electric School Bus Demonstration Project, will be talking about how you can get going on your own pilot at your school. And then we'll leave a lot of time for questions at the end. So to begin, I'm going to walk you through some fundamentals of electric school buses and the industry as a whole. So first off, why do we care? We all should know by now that transportation is the single largest source of air pollution in the United States, and diesel emissions contribute to this greatly. Diesel fumes tend to carry a lot of particulate matter and different greenhouse gas emissions that not only impact our climate, but our health. In particular, it's hard for small school children's lungs to process out some of the particulate matter that diesel fumes put out. And so here at the VEIC, we really see transitioning school buses away from diesel as a great way to improve not only our health, but the climate. There's a great opportunity in school buses. There's over 400,000 school buses nationally. 90 to 95% of these are run off of diesel, and a lot of these vehicles are quite old, particularly in areas of the country where the vehicles can last longer because they don't experience erosion from salt or bad climate. And the most popular alternative fuel out there is propane, but there's a growing market for electric school buses. To date, there's about 55 electric school buses on the road, 3 in Massachusetts, which is that pilot project I mentioned earlier. Bethany will talk about that a little bit later on. 1 in New York, 1 in Minnesota, and about 50 in California. And there's even more planning to come to New York and California. Both have announced more pilot projects, and we'll see more on the road coming in the next year or so. So with this opportunity, why don't we see more electric school buses on the road? The main barrier is the cost. Electric school buses are 2 to 3 times the cost of a diesel. In addition, schools find barriers in having to install new fueling infrastructure and enforce new fueling practices with their staff. And electric school buses, like any new technology, requires new training for mechanics and drivers. And so schools, we know, are strapped for money, they're strapped for time for their staff, and to ask them to take on an extra cost and then implement these new practices can be a big barrier. And so that's why we're doing these workshops and why we're trying to help educate people on the opportunities there. So like I said, there's a lot of benefits of electric school buses, not only for our health and environment, which I touched on earlier, but they're also cheaper to run. Electric school buses have less maintenance requirements. They don't need as many fuel changes. They don't have as many air filtration systems like diesel buses do, and so they tend to have less maintenance costs. And they also contribute to our energy independence. Using electric allows us to use an energy source that we produce in the United States and help keep dollars locally. In addition, electric prices tend to be fairly stable. To the right, you'll see a chart. Those lines on the above are all different types of fuel sources that we traditionally see in buses. So propane, CNG, gasoline, diesel. I know it's a little hard to see, but all those big lines that switch up and down, those are those fuels. And then that blue line on the bottom that kind of stays steady, that's electric. And so we see in the last 20 years that electric prices tend to stay stable, and this can help schools not only save money, but also understand, project out what they're going to be spending in the future. Finally, there's potential in using the batteries on school buses as an energy storage resource that can help reduce the cost during peak high demand, not only for the school, but possibly regionally for the utility. And so this comes from the ability to pull energy not only from the grid, but put energy back onto the grid and be able to shave some of those high peak demand costs. We call this bidirectional charging, or vehicle to grid, vehicle to building. This is the future of this technology, but we haven't really seen it done too prolifically quite yet, and the technology is still pretty expensive, and so it hopefully will help fund the buses in the future, but today there's still a lot of barriers. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the models available today that you can go out and purchase. There's three main ones on the market. One is a Type A developed by Transtech, and the other one is a Starcraft Type C school bus. These both use technology from the company Motive. They developed a electric powertrain that Transtech put on a Ford chassis, and Starcraft developed their own bus and put it on the Type C. And there's also a bus by E-Line, which is a Type C, standard Type C school bus. They're a company out of Quebec and actually have done a lot of work in developing these buses to be deployed in winter conditions. So we use these buses in Massachusetts. The next slide is a sheet that has been developed by VEIC to show you the different type of school buses, electric school buses that you can go out and buy today. I'm not going to walk through it because there's a lot of information, but do know this is on our website, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And the exciting part is that there's more models coming on the market every day, really. On Monday and Tuesday, Thomas and IC announced that they'll be developing their own electric school buses in 2019. Thomas announced that their bus will have about 100 miles. IC announced that their bus will have about 120 miles. And Bluebird announced, I think a couple months ago, that they'll be developing their own school bus as well that we should see in June or July of 2018, and they'll be having a Type A and a Type D. And what's really exciting about this is now every major manufacturer of school buses in the United States will have an electric model. And we're hoping this will help not only push the technology forward, but also help bring down that upfront cost that we discussed earlier. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about charging. Charging is kind of the other half of this equation. You have the buses, but then you also need this new infrastructure. And for those of you who are familiar with electric vehicle technology, you may know that there's three types of charging out there. Level 1, which is 120 volts, just your standard outlet. 240, 280 volt plug is considered a level 2 charger, and this is about the equivalent of a dryer outlet. And then we have DC fast charging, which is 480 volts. For school buses, a level 1 would take forever to charge your school bus, so we really don't see that in the market. The market instead is focusing on level 2 and DC fast charging. So for a school bus, most of the school buses on the road today utilize a level 2 AC charger. Now they look a lot like those chargers that you see around the country for your personal vehicle, but they're a little bit different. They have a higher amperage, so you can't just pull a school bus up to a standard public station and just charge it off of that. Rather, you need to have a special charger that has a higher amperage. And depending on your charger and the bus you purchase, you may also need access to 3-phase power. So these are all things you should consider when you move forward with purchasing a bus. I'm going to talk a little bit about installation of chargers, and the reason I do this is because from our experience with the Massachusetts project, installing a charger was one of the first barriers that we faced with deploying the buses. Most people don't park their buses right near a building, and you want to make sure that you park your bus near a power source, or it could be quite expensive. You also want to consider snow removal. You don't want to plow to go and take out that charger when they are plowing your bus yard. You also want to make sure they don't cover it up with snow. You may need access to 3-phase power, which depending on where you park your bus or even your school, you may not have access to. And getting access to 3-phase power when it's not there already can be quite expensive. Signage we also see is important. Make sure that no one's going to park in that spot that you need to be able to plug in your bus. You also want to consider how many ports you install when you install your charger. You may want to look at installing a charger with more than one gun on it, because if you're going to buy more school buses, it's going to be cheaper at that time to install one unit with 2 ports rather than just installing 1 port. Like I said before, your distance between your power source and your charger are going to be the most expensive entity. The farther you're away from the power source, the more expensive it is going to be running that power to your charger. Over to your right, towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see a diagram that we helped develop to show the schools where they may want to install their charger and park their bus. And then safety is always a thing that schools want to consider, particularly with children running around. The chargers themselves are quite safe. The gun won't have energy running through it until it connects to that bus. And so no one's going to get electrocuted or anything. You don't want anyone tripping on the cord. You don't want the cord to be run over. You don't want it stuck to the ground and frozen to the ground in the winter or anything like that. Cord management is really important. If you're running a fleet that only the people in the area have access to, it's fine if you just have good signage and a good place to wrap up the cord. But if it's more public area, you might want to purchase a charger that has a retractable cord to make sure that that cord just gets brought in automatically. In addition, you might want to consider a unit or a lockbox to make sure that no one else can access that charger. So some of the schools in Massachusetts actually bought non-network stations where they put a box around it and locked it so that other people can't access it. But you also could do this by purchasing a charger that has a locking mechanism within it. So that was my presentation, and hopefully it was a good overview. I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Wallace-Broder to talk a little bit about funding electric school buses.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here to share how you might be able to fund the cost differential between your traditional diesel bus and the electric school bus. Next slide. So the most significant opportunity to help fund electric school buses is the Volkswagen settlement, which requires VW to provide almost $3 billion to an environmental mitigation trust to be used by states to reduce NOx emissions. The settlement outlines 10 mitigation actions eligible under the trust, which generally focus on reducing NOx emissions through the repower or replacement of older heavy-duty diesel vehicles with newer, cleaner vehicles, including electric vehicles. Among the eligible activities are electric school buses. School districts and contractors that provide school transportation services to school districts are eligible for up to 100% funding, including the cost of charging infrastructure. While states have the flexibility to fully fund electric school buses, it's important to note that it's up to each state to determine how they want to allocate funds, and states may choose to require cost share to help stretch their settlement dollars. So this slide shows how much each state in the Northeast is slated to get from the VW settlement. If you saw early numbers, this might look like a bigger allocation, and that's because there are actually two settlements for 2-liter and 3-liter. The 3-liter settlement came a little bit later, so each state got a little bit of a bump in their allocation. The good news is that the settlement is finally final, and the trust effective date is October 2nd, 2017. This means that the clock has started for states to file their beneficiary designation form, which is due on December 1st, and that's a hard deadline, so they can access funds. States are required to develop a mitigation plan and submit it to the national trustee 30 days prior to their first request for funds. And this is a bit of a change from the original draft of the settlement, which actually set a hard deadline for when those plans had to be completed and submitted. States are at various stages of developing plans, and electric school buses are being considered for funding in many states. Some states have released draft plans, and most states have websites to capture public comments on how VW funds should be used. And I would encourage you to find that website and comment on the importance of using VW settlement money for electric school buses. Next slide. Here are some VW settlement resources you can check out to get more information. The National Association of State Energy Officials has a wide range of resources for states, including a VW settlement beneficiary mitigation plan toolkit, which provides information on eligible projects and technology. The National Association of Clean Air Agencies is tracking information on state beneficiaries and status of their activities. So if you don't know who your state beneficiary is or where they are in the process, that would be a good site to check out. And the Sierra Club has some good resources for advocates who want to influence their state plan. Next slide. I now want to turn to another source of funding that is important for anybody that's interested in this technology to know about, and that's the EPA's Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. There are actually 3 programs that you need to be aware of from this program. 2 of them are national programs, the Clean Diesel National Grant and the Federal School Bus Rebates. About 70% of DERA appropriations go for these 2 national competitive grants and rebates. And then about 30% of DERA funds are allocated to states to help fund diesel reduction programs. All of these programs require that vehicles that are being replaced must be scrapped or rendered permanently disabled if they access funds for their projects. I'm going to hit high-level information about each program. EPA has a really good website, which is at the bottom of these slides. It's epa.gov/clean diesel. So you can find a lot of information about all three programs at that site. So first, the Clean Diesel National Grant Program was allocated about $34 million in 2017. Applications were due in April, so the next round will probably be next spring. And I actually think there's there's going to be probably a smaller allocation. Funding is allocated by EPA regions, so you can see the three regions in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic here. And school buses are eligible for funding. As I mentioned, vehicles must be scrapped. Also, vehicle replacements that would have occurred through normal attrition within 3 years of the project start date are not eligible for funding. Next slide. The federal school bus rebate program has about $7 million in funding this year and will provide rebates to replace or retrofit old dirty school buses. Rebates are selected in a lottery, and those selected receive payment when all work is completed. Eligible applicants are regional, state, local, or tribal agencies, as well as private companies operating school buses. I just want to note that the application period is now open, and applications are due November 14th. Next slide. The EPA also allocates DERA money to states to fund eligible state projects. States choose to participate, and funding is allocated by formula among participating states. About $8.6 million is allocated to the program in 2017, and states can use, I want to point out that there's definitely a connection between this program, state programs, and the VW settlement, and that states can use VW settlement funds for their DERA non-federal voluntary match, which makes additional bonus funding available to them. And states can also use VW funds for actions eligible under DERA, which allows for additional activities for VW money. So I would suggest, if you want to find out more about your state program, that you contact your state air quality agency. And now I'm going to turn it over to Bethany to talk about pilots.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. So my name is Bethany Whitaker, and I am also with VEIC. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is the experience that VEIC had managing an electric school bus demonstration project in Massachusetts. And just as a frame of reference, the Massachusetts project was the first all-electric Type C school buses to be deployed in the United States, or brand new, fully manufactured all-electric Type C school buses to be in the United States. We purchased 3 E-Lion school buses. They're deployed in 3 different school districts across the state of Massachusetts. We started that project in 2015 and got the buses on the road in late 2016, around then, late 2016, early 2017. And so we have about 8 months of operating experiences with those vehicles, and we've learned a lot. So what I want to do today is walk you through some of the things that we learned going through the demonstration project process, and some of the things that I would definitely recommend, sort of things that we learned that would make it better. So the first thing is about identifying, clarifying your goals. It may seem like an obvious thing to start with, but sometimes, and I think what we learned in Massachusetts was overlooked or underestimated. When you're getting started with an electric school bus, there are a lot of reasons why you want to be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish. The good news is that there's a lot of reasons why you want to do a project, like public health, also energy, climate change, to name a few. But being clear about your goals will help you with a lot of things. The first one is funding. I'll talk more about funding in a minute, but knowing what you're trying to accomplish will help you target funders and funding opportunities. The second key reason for clarifying goals is engaging and getting buy-in from your stakeholders. I'm also going to talk more about that in a moment, but stakeholders can be a direct link to funding, and there are a lot of parts to an electric school bus project, so clear goals, lots of support, and access to a wide variety of funding sources will help you get off to the best start possible. So stakeholders are essential. Implementing an electric school bus is a system change. It's a cliche, but change can be difficult. So building a broad base of support and being able to draw upon the support is critical. It's also important to think about everyone who will be affected by the project and making sure that they know it's happening, they know why it's important, and they know what's expected of them. One of the things that we learned in Massachusetts which is a little bit surprising, is that some of the projects were conceived and planned out without including the most important partners, like the transportation directors. And that led to a lot of challenges, as you can imagine. And a demonstration project will likely require a lot of patience from the transportation team, so getting their support as early in the process as possible is essential. At the same time, it's also important not to overlook stakeholders that might not be directly in the line of fire of implementation, but can be key assets and resources for you. We found that parents, for example, can be allies, as well as other staff in the school system. We've talked a lot about funding already, but it's really important. As Jennifer and Michelle both pointed out, there's a lot of reasons why electric school buses are great, but they also cost more than traditional diesel buses. And of course, school districts don't have a lot of extra or really any funding or any extra funding. So the good news is there are funding sources coming online. I think Jennifer just walked through several of those. The other good news is that even without new funding sources, partners and stakeholders have funded electric school bus projects around the country. All of these projects were partnered with grant funds and all involved partnerships. So speaking of partnerships and stakeholders, one of your most important partners is going to be your local utility. At the very least, your local utility can help you plan and install the charging infrastructure, and they can help you understand your electricity bill so you can anticipate how much it's going to cost to charge the bus and what you can do to manage charging and keep costs low. We also have seen interest from utilities in helping fund and support electric school bus projects. Utilities will be interested and motivated by different factors. For some, there are regulatory reasons why they want to support electric vehicles. For others, they're interested in the energy storage potential of the battery on the bus. Talk to your utility, find out what they're interested in, and see how you can work together. Review your operating needs and priorities. So the biggest cost driver on an electric school bus is the size of the battery. So understanding how far you need to be able to drive the bus on a daily basis and when you're going to be able to charge it is going to help you determine how much you need to spend on the bus. There's other features, just like any school bus, those electric school buses can be equipped with any amenities that you need and want, like wheelchair lifts and cameras, seat belts, things like that. Another important thing to consider is auxiliary heaters or the heating system. In Massachusetts, as many of you know, you're in the Northeast, is a cold state, and we have cold winters, and there's state regulations about how warm the interior cabin needs to be. When we bought our buses in 2016, the auxiliary heater was the best system on the market. We installed those heaters. In all three cases, they're diesel fuel-fired heaters, and they've worked well and kept the bus warm. But just understanding what you need to do in designing your bus and making sure that you purchase the right systems and amenities will help you get started. So the next thing is to buy a bus. I think that's the fun part for almost everybody. The specs for an electric school bus are going to be really similar to a diesel bus. As I just mentioned, all the amenities that you find in a traditional school bus will also be available for electric school buses, but there's some other things that you need to consider. Things like, and VEIC has a set of draft specs on our website that you can take a look at. These should be used as a starting point and a reference only. When we purchased our school buses and wrote the specs, there were not that many models available, and we didn't know collectively, the industry didn't know as much about electric school buses as we do now. So we're happy to answer any questions about those specs and talk to you individually if you're interested. But I think some of the key things to think about are your warranty, the ongoing support for the vehicle, the range, and some of the data and information systems that you want to get from the bus. So buying, installing, and charging equipment, this is the next step. It's also something, as Michelle was talking about, it really shouldn't be hard. The technology is standard, and almost all communities across the Northeast, or many, have some electric vehicle charging systems available already. But there are also reasons why school districts are slightly different and can be more complicated. So getting started as soon as you order the bus and figuring out where you're going to park the bus, what sort of electrical systems are at that parking facility, how you can hook up to it, and getting somebody lined up to install the charger and buying the right charging system should be started almost as soon as you order the bus. So training and support for the vehicle. As I mentioned, in Massachusetts, we took delivery of the first line buses in the United States. And so through the process, both line bus and the demonstration team and the individual school districts, we learned a lot about what's required to support an electric school bus in the field. As many people know, electric vehicles and their drivetrains are more like computers than traditional vehicles, so that requires some getting used to, slightly different skills, and slightly different kind of maintenance procedures. So understanding what those are, getting information about those, and training your staff is going to be really is essential. And then the other item I don't want to underestimate is ongoing support. This was a challenge for us in Massachusetts. As I mentioned, we were the first E-Lion buses in the U.S. So E-Lion learned a lot about serving schools in the United States, and we learned a lot about working with them and making sure that we got all the parts and services that we needed when we got them. I would say all of those hurdles have been surmounted, and we have a really good system in place right now that's been effective, and our school buses are doing great. But there was some learning that went on with that. And then sort of finally, evaluating and reporting on your experience. When you get started with your project, as I mentioned, being clear about your goals is really essential. And so starting to measure and track progress towards those goals is also a key part of the demonstration project. In most cases, a demonstration project is going to be hopefully the first of many more electric school buses that will be deployed in your district. And so in making sure that you can communicate what it accomplished, what worked, what might not have worked, and how it compares against your existing fleet is really important. So we suggest that people start right, even as you're planning and conceiving your school bus project, start tracking mileage, fuel costs, maintenance costs, and vehicle reliability. And then, so one of the things in Massachusetts that was a little bit rocky was pulling data off of the bus and understanding some of those key metrics that I just mentioned. We did a lot of recording by hand. In Amherst, Massachusetts, we have an electric school bus that's been running for about 7 months. And I just want to share some statistics on that vehicle and what it's doing. The average daily mileage in Amherst is about 40 miles. So they're doing around 500 miles a month. That's probably, or maybe lower than some people think, or not. We're spending, in the 7 months, we spent about $450 in electricity. That's a savings. Our estimates are about $250 over the cost of diesel. We also avoided purchasing 427 gallons of diesel, which is a lot of fossil fuels, if that's one of the things that you're concerned about. And then one of the things that has been really interesting about our experience in Amherst is the fuel efficiency of the vehicle. The line bus that we bought was warranted, or what they told us it was going to have 74 or 75 miles of range. And we found that as the drivers got used to driving the bus, that the bus, they were driving it more efficiently, and they were able to get an effective range of more than 80 miles. And so the data can really help you understand that and get a sense of, you know, maybe you have a little bit more capacity, or maybe you can change the way you're charging it or deploying the vehicle and give you some more flexibility. So just as a quick recap, the steps that we've identified to a demonstration project are: 1, creating a clear vision and goals, lining up your stakeholders, finding your funding, working with your utility, understanding what your operational needs are, and translating that into a bus purchase, buy and install your charging infrastructure, make sure you have your training and support systems in place, and then evaluate and track and report on your progress. Thanks.
All right, so thank you to our speakers today. I've been tracking the questions as they've been coming in, and so we'll start going through those now. And I will say that please feel free to follow up if we don't get to your question, and we have all your information as well. So we'll follow up with you for any questions that we don't get to today. But the first question we have here is, what determines if you need 3-phase power? Is it tied to the specific model?
Oh, 3-phase power? Oh, no, for the bus.
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was a Michelle's question, because, sorry about that. So it's really tied to the charging system, right?
Yeah, it's tied to which charging system you decide to move forward with. The manufacturer of the charger should be able to speak to with you about that. And obviously, we say buy your bus first, and so you know what charger you need to buy. But once you know that, go and find your charger and see what the specs are on it. I'm not sure, do the Massachusetts chargers need 3-phase power? No, I don't believe so. No. Yeah, because we just use standard level 2 chargers, right. So we didn't need 3-phase power. But if you want to do a DC fast charger, you're going to need 3-phase power.
Great. Okay, the next question we have here is, how does cold weather impact range?
Okay, that's a really great question. It's one that we hear a lot. Michelle, I think I have a couple slides at the end of the presentation, and I just wanted to show these because there's when people hear about electric vehicles, you hear a lot that weather has a big impact on range, and it does. But part of having an auxiliary heater on the vehicle helps you mitigate against that. So the first slide that we're showing here are the way that temperature has impacted range on some of the electric school buses in Massachusetts. And you can see that there is a clear correlation. The warmer weather, when it's colder out, you get less miles out of your bus. And when it's warmer, you get more miles. But I think one of the interesting things is, and if you can switch to the next slide, Michelle, is that the driver experience and the driver's skill has more of an impact on range. It's a stronger correlation, and it's a stronger correlation from a statistical perspective, and it's also a stronger correlation just from the data. And so a good driver can get more range out of the bus and overcome any differences in weather. So the key lesson from that is train your drivers well, monitor how they're doing with their bus, and that will maximize your range.
And I'll just say off of that, something that we learned from Massachusetts is it's really helpful to find a driver who's eager to drive the bus. We tried to avoid forcing anyone to drive it because we know how much a driver can impact the range and maybe even harm the demonstration project. So finding a driver who's eager to play with the technology and learn it is really helpful.
Well, that actually brings me to another question that we see here, if you have anything else to add on this, but how have the drivers reacted to the buses, and have they had any problems?
We've had a couple of small problems. As I mentioned, when the buses first went on the road, there were just some getting used to issues and challenges with the bus. One of the big things is all of the buses, I don't think we talked about this too much, but they have regenerative braking systems on the buses. And when the buses go out in snow and ice, the process of using the regen braking changes the way that the bus handles on snow and ice. And so something, for example, that drivers had to learn to do was disengage the regen braking to get more stability and control over the bus if there was going to be snow or ice on the road. And I think that other than that, there haven't been any real big challenges with the drivers. It is a different vehicle. It behaves differently. People have to get used to it, but otherwise they tend to really like it.
Great. So the next two questions, I'm going to tie them together. I think that they largely go together. But what are the steps needed to obtain VW funds? When will the VW funds be available? And how can they get key dates on funding opportunities?
Sure, I can answer that as best I can. So as I mentioned, the trust effective date was October 2nd. States have 60 days, so they must file their beneficiary status as of December 1st. And the trustee, which is Wilmington National Trust, has to certify the beneficiary within 120 days, so about 4 months after the trust effective date. At that point, the state beneficiary has access to their funds. The other step that the state has to go through is to develop a mitigation plan and submit that to the trustee 30 days before they ask for their first funds. So that makes it a little bit of a moving target among states as to when they're going to submit that and try to access the funds. But I think it's fair to say that 2018, that most states are going to be accessing the funds. There is a timeline in which they need to disperse funds. So I think you're going to start seeing money available in 2018. There are two things. The plan may articulate how a state intends to invest with some specificity. So they may say we want to put a certain percentage of money towards electric school buses, or they may not do that. But in any event, most states, I think, are going to develop an RFP and put out an RFP for projects. So what I would say is you want to start paying attention to that, find out who your state beneficiary is, get on their listserv. As I said, if you can comment now as they're working on their plans on how they should allocate their funding, but I would say just find out who your beneficiary is and stay on top of the program development so that when they do put out an RFP and ask for projects, you're on top of that and can submit. States have multiple years to disperse funds, so if you're not ready in the first year, I think that there will be opportunities to try to access funds going forward. But I think the sooner that you're ready to put in a project, the better.
Great. And before we move on from that thought, we just got a comment that regarding the VW settlement, many states already have websites up, so you can check those out as well. And then we just got another question on the same topic. Have any of the state mitigation plans developed so far specify use for electric school buses?
That's a good question. It's certainly a hot topic in many states, and some states have said they want to invest settlement funds in school buses, but in some cases have not been specific about electric. So I would say that's a TBD. There's very few states that actually have written draft plans available to the public quite yet. So I'd say in the next few months, you're going to see more specificity, but as I said, some states may not be that specific in their plans, and they are not required to be specific. They just have to, they can just say they could say we're gonna do all activities, all eligible projects. So it's really gonna be determined about the state strategy. And I do know that there are a lot of advocates that are pushing states to invest in electric school buses. So I do think that this is going to be a hot topic, and definitely encourage people to get engaged.
Great. So I'm looking to Bethany for this next one. How long is a battery warranted, and is it warranted to preserve a minimum range capacity over its lifetime?
So that's a good question. Excuse me. The buses that we purchased had a battery warranty of 5 years, or 160,000 kilowatt hours, and I'll get back to that in a second. And the warranty stated that at the end of the 5 years, at least 80% of the range would still be remaining. So that means when we purchased the bus in year one, the range was warranted for, or it was said to be able to drive 74, 75 miles. And if 80% of that range is still remaining at the end of 5 years, the bus should still be able to go between 55 and 60 miles without being recharged. The warranty also had a kilowatt hour component to it, and that measures the amount of energy that goes into the bus. And some of the reasons why we specifically requested that part of the warranty, in part because we were examining vehicle to grid and vehicle to building demonstrations. And so if you're charging and discharging the battery a lot, we wanted to know what the impact that would have on your warranty. So if you're just using it for transportation and that's your main concern, Lion Bus did warranty the battery on the vehicles that we purchased for 5 years and guaranteed that 80% of the range would still be remaining at the end of that period.
Great. The next question we have here is, how long does it take to charge a school bus on a level 2 charger?
Sure. So it would, if the bus went from 0 to 100, like being totally depleted in their battery and you wanted to fully charge it, it can take between 6 to 8 hours. But the school buses in Massachusetts aren't depleting their batteries completely. And so most of them have been saying that it takes them about 3 to 4 hours to recharge their battery every night.
Okay. So next question, you mentioned challenges regarding ongoing support from the electric bus company you used in Massachusetts. Can you give specific examples of some of the challenges or difficulties?
Definitely. So one of the things about eLion, and I think eLion is a new company. It's also based in Canada, and our project was in Massachusetts. They're not that far away, but there were some challenges about working with eLion and the fact that they were a Canadian company and we did have to cross borders. So one of the first challenges that we had was about vehicle licensing and registration. That was a new process for eLion, and they had never done it before. They didn't exactly know what it entailed, and so one of our first buses did not pass, was not licensed in the first inspection. It was really minor things, but it was just a matter of getting used to what the expectations were and the level of detail that the Department of Motor Vehicles was going to be expecting. I would say there were also some challenges associated with just communication, because the public schools may or may not have been able to pick up the phone and call Canada. There was also some differences in what we expected in terms of response time. And then also Lion Bus did not have a local dealer. So if we needed some simple repairs made to the bus, like a windshield or tires, things like that, and we weren't doing those things in-house, and we went to another vehicle repair shop to do those things, and the warranty, we didn't agree on the warranty amounts. We worked through that, and we made agreements on how much we could charge per hour would be covered under the warranty. But just that whole process of how much service was expected, who was going to do it, how much we was allowed to be charged for that, just a lot of that we had to work out. And most of the problems, we did have some problems, some parts of the bus did break down, I think, and had to be sent back and fixed, but those were all taken care of and all the buses are doing fine now. Most of the challenges were just being the new system and communication.
Great. Let's see, how about this one? Have manufacturers addressed the question of vehicle-to-grid applications and the impacts on warranty?
I would say the answer to that question is no, because there haven't been a lot of vehicle-to-grid applications in the field yet. Most of our experience has been with Lion Bus. I know Bluebird is also manufacturing an electric school bus, and they are also looking at grid interactive features. And so I'm sure that when their bus comes out, the warranties will address this. In Massachusetts, as I mentioned, we expect to do a vehicle-to-grid application. We have not done that yet, but when we wrote our specifications and asked for the warranty, we did want to make sure that the impacts of charging and discharging the battery were included in the warranty.
Great, and continuing to talk about the batteries, do buses have multiple batteries? What is the approximate cost to replace a bus's batteries? And will that likely need to happen before a bus is retired?
So yes, the buses do have multiple battery packs. My understanding of the cost, so in Massachusetts, we have 4 battery packs, and I think it's $125,000 for the cost of the batteries.
That's not it yet.
I think that's about that.
Yeah.
So you can get a bus with 5 battery packs or 3. We got 4, that gave us 75 miles. And so you can replace, we don't expect that you'll have to replace them because they're under warranty, and our batteries have been under warranty, and there was one that did need to be replaced, but that was done free of charge. And we expect that we won't have to do that during the life of the project.
And the warranties are based on draws from the battery, and so if you added bidirectional charging to that, you may draw down the warranty faster. And so in the Massachusetts project, we try to spec out those warranties so that we wouldn't have to replace that battery. But I know in another demonstration project where they're using bidirectional fairly frequently on a daily basis, they're expecting to have to swap out the battery halfway through the life of the bus.
And we just got a helpful comment that I'm assuming came in from Massachusetts, talking about the price of the battery packs. So we'll
yeah, so no, and he said the battery pack is $32,000 per pack.
Okay, let's see here.
How much does?
What does an auxiliary heating system entail, and does it require retrofitting, and how much does it cost?
So I'll take that one also. So the auxiliary heater does not require retrofit. The bus is designed with the heater in mind and ready to be installed. An auxiliary heater is not a complicated system. Many buses in cold parts of the United States, including transit buses, have auxiliary heaters. They're designed to supplement the heat that's produced by the engine. And it's a pretty standard fuel-fired diesel heater that's installed on the E-Line buses, and they worked really well, and we had no problems with those.
Okay, so this is a long question, so I'm just trying to read through it. New York and New Jersey have regulations that require narrower buses than what is currently available on the market. Or when we did a workshop in New Jersey last month, and at the time that was the case. And has New York overcome that barrier? Are any companies manufacturing or planning to manufacture electric buses that would meet the New York, New Jersey standards?
So I don't know the answer to all of that question, but I can provide a couple of insights. One thing is when we did talk to the New York City school districts, and I know some of them are some staff are on the call, so they may be able to write in an answer as well. But transit buses also are wider than school buses, so they've been able to work around the use of transit buses on the New York City streets. So the hope was that the electric school buses could also get in under that umbrella. And there's only a handful of streets really where the wider buses are not operable. In terms of one of the things that the manufacturers have done in the past couple of months is they're manufacturing more different types of school buses. So now that there's more types out there, there's smaller ones, there's type A, type C, type D, and so you will start to see more options for what kind of vehicles you can purchase, and the width issue may be circumvented through that process.
Great. So we have a comment on the batteries. When the battery pack has to be replaced several years later, it's expected that the replacement cost will be much less than the original cost. So that's good information to keep in mind there. And then what is this? New York City.
Oh, they did not get the waiver.
So New York City did not get the waiver for the wider buses. Let's see.
So there's a question here. Has anyone explored successfully used emission reduction credits to pay for their bus? And so to date, the answer is no, they have not. But the Massachusetts project was funded by the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So that's not exactly credits, but it's revenues that are earned through the trading of emission credits. So kind of indirectly, I would say the answer to that question is yes.
Okay, great. So another question that we have here is that you mentioned that a bunch of new buses will be available soon. Do you expect any changes, developments, new features, or anything like that with the new buses?
I think from the lessons that we learned in Massachusetts, there are a handful of things that we have talked to Lion Bus about, and I think there's been other conversations sort of in the industry in general of things that we would like to see in the new buses. One is acoustical panels. One of the ironies of the electric school buses is that they are very, very quiet buses. If you are standing on the street and the bus goes by, it's remarkable how quiet it is. But when the bus is filled with children, and those children are being boisterous and noisy, as they often are on school buses, that there's a lot of echoes, that there's a lot of echo in the bus. And so because the bus is so quiet, the bus engine is so quiet, the buses were designed without acoustical panels inside the bus, but actually, yeah, the bus is still quiet from the outside, but the inside can be really noisy. So one of the things that we recommended is that acoustical panels become part of the standard bus. Another thing is the cooling fans are very loud, and Line Bus is working on making quieter cooling fans. Two other systems things that have been noted, and we've talked to Line Bus quite a bit about. One is the data that we'll be able to pull off the bus. That system we've been working with them as our buses have been on the road. It's getting much better, and I think we're very, very close to having the kind of system that we want and expect. But that's been a process and something that's going to be continue to be developed and improved. And the second thing is the charging system and managing and programming your charging so that when you hook up your bus to the charger, you can set the charger so that it turns on at midnight and that your bus is fully charged and heated and ready to go at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think in recap, the four big things that we're looking for are acoustical panels inside the bus, quieter cooling fans, better data collection systems, and better charging programming systems. Kind of redundant, but.
Okay, great. So we have a question here pertaining to vehicle-to-grid interaction, and this person is curious about our experiences in Massachusetts.
Okay, so that is a good question, actually, and I think we have a couple of slides in the back there on vehicle-to-grid. So there's a lot of excitement and interest in the vehicle-to-grid components and what that promise offers to the industry. So a couple slides. Some of the things that we learned, one is that there are technology considerations, and I'll talk about that in a second. There's a lot of information about how much money you can save or earn through the vehicle-to-grid components. We have some ideas and perspective on that, and then the question of who's going to be the partners and who's going to really lead this effort. So the first thing on the technology is that it's not off the shelf at this moment. I know Bluebird is working on it, and one of the things that they've promised is to deliver a school bus and an on-the-shelf bidirectional vehicle-to-grid charging system. So when we bought our buses from Lion and deployed them in Massachusetts, those systems were not available. They implementing a system in pieces where you have to buy the charger and the software and the inverter separately and then hook them up and match them to a building energy management system is complex and fairly risky. We have not done that yet. It's still part of the project and part of the expectations of something that the Massachusetts effort will accomplish, but we have not made a lot of progress on that at this moment. One of the reasons why we haven't made a lot of progress is the value proposition is not really there, at least not for the school district. One of the ways that we think that vehicle-to-building technology can be useful is through peak shaving, so reducing those instances of when your usage spikes up. The problem with schools is that they have several of those over a month, and often they occur at times when you want to put the bus on the road, so the bus might not be available to shave that peak. And if you miss that shaving of the peak, you don't save any money. So from a school's perspective, it's probably not something, it's a complicated system that they may or may not be interested in. There's not a lot of money for them to be saved by implementing it, and there's a fair amount of technology risk. For the utility, however, there's more promise and opportunity, getting them on board and getting their participation in the project, both to manage the technology, to control the technology, and then to actually try to avoid the cost is really where we see the future of vehicle-to-grid going.
Great. Let's see. We have a question that's a combination of a comment and a question. I think Springfield, Massachusetts Regional Transit has electric buses. Any idea how the school bus experience is in comparison?
Sure. So Springfield, Mass does have electric transit buses. I think they have 4 buses that they've deployed on different routes. And I would say, and Michelle, you can jump in, but the electric transit bus market is more developed than the electric school bus market. There's more manufacturers that have models that are available. There's more vehicles on the road, and that just the whole technology and infrastructure is more well developed. And so we have more experience. It's gone through a lot of transformations. The buses have increased the amount of miles that they can drive. Their range has increased quite a bit. The cost of the buses has come down by about 30%, and the adoption rates are increasing every single year. So from the school bus market, if we look to transit, I think we would say it's a very rosy future, and there's a lot of potential there. We're really at the early stages with electric school buses, and getting more on the road, collecting more demonstration projects, more data, more experience is going to help us shape and really accelerate this market.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit, Bethany and I both work with transit and schools in deploying electric technology, and it's 2 very different industries. You know, transit has an entire team that's dedicated to getting buses out on the road, where schools maybe have 1 person or they don't do it themselves, they contract out, and so it's just a very different market. And schools also go less mileage, they run the buses less time, and so there's a lot to be learned from transit, but we also need to recognize how different the markets are.
Great. So
Can I answer the WIP question?
there's one more comment here. Someone saying that they spoke with E-Lion and other manufacturers about the width of the electric school buses, and that they do make New Jersey standard width buses currently.
Okay, so I think that that's a good point, that when we held the New York City workshop, there was only Lion Bus was the only bus on the market. And I think Lion Bus is 102 inches or 98 inches instead of 96 inches. And frankly, people love that about the Lion Bus, that it's a little bit wider, there's more space in the aisle, there's more space for the kids. But yes, if you're operating particularly in an older northeastern city, you're going to run into width problems. But some of the Bluebird and the new models being announced by Thomas and International will be standard width, and they should have no problems.
So I think with that, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you to all the participants for your questions and attentiveness. On this last slide, you'll find our website. On our website, oh, is there one more question that we got to address? Sorry.
So for heaters, don't we want to use natural gas instead of diesel? Tesla uses a battery power heater. Recycled batteries can also bring costs down.
Yes. So for the fuel fire heaters, you can use propane, natural gas, or diesel. And what we did in Massachusetts was that whatever fueling system they had on site already, we stuck with that. And so yes, you could use natural gas. We might want to encourage people to use natural gas or even propane. But for us and the demonstration project and everything that we were taking on, I think we just went with path of least resistance. We also expect that in the future, auxiliary heaters will become less important, and there'll probably be new technologies similar to the way that heat pumps work that can reduce the need for an auxiliary heater. But yes, you're right, natural gas is better than diesel, and okay, Tesla also uses a battery power heater, which is great, and recycled batteries do offer promise.
All right, so as we are about to wrap up, we've got questions coming in again, so we'll keep going. So have you considered converting buses?
Sure, yeah, so we looked at that when we first started the Massachusetts project. We looked at converting buses. Conversions in general, I've worked with conversions across different industries, and they tend to be difficult and not very clear cut, because you're taking a bus that was built for one system and putting on a new system, and so there's issues there. And then in particular in Massachusetts, buses tend to rust out before anything else happens, and so to take a bus that's already possibly starting to rust and strap on a very expensive drivetrain and battery to it just didn't make any sense. And so there are some conversion companies out in California, but my understanding is that they're really falling off the marketplace, and where it's going is towards purpose-built vehicles.
Great, thank you. And then let's see, another question that just came in. Do any states require their state education boards to approve the purchase of electric school buses by local jurisdictions?
Okay, so I'm going to say the answer to that is no at this moment, but I think the question kind of behind the question is that really we've only been doing electric school buses kind of as demonstrations and as one-offs or onesies and twosies. And if they're going to become part of the school transportation infrastructure, then we're going to need some more oversight and participation from state agencies, including more specific guidelines on how we inspect and license electric school buses. But that is not available at this time.
Okay. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up now. Okay, we're actually going to wrap it up. So, like I said on this last slide, there is our website, just VEIC.org/eSchoolBus. On that website, you'll see there's a comment box. Feel free to submit questions through that, or email any of us directly if you have our email addresses. On that website, as we've mentioned before, there's a handful of resources. There's the list of the different manufacturers available. As those new manufacturers come online, we'll make sure to add those. Bluebird still hasn't released all their specs for their buses, so that's why that's not on there quite yet. There's the draft bus specs that Bethany mentioned. There's tips on how to work with your utility, and there is a guide to installing a charging station. So hopefully you guys find those resources helpful, and if you have any questions about them, feel free to reach out to us. This webinar has been recorded. If anyone would like the recording, please reach out to us and we can share it with you. In addition, you'll get a survey at the end of this workshop, and please fill that out if you get a second. So thank you very much to everyone, and we look forward to speaking with you more.